My husband secretly sold my jewelry collection while I was visiting my family. When I returned home, he told me with a smug look on his face, "I made a big business move while you were away." I asked what investment. "I sold your jewels, every one of them. They financed my empire." I burst out laughing at the jewelry he had sold. "Helen, you're back," Michael said with a grin. As I entered the living room, his overly casual tone immediately set off alarm bells. "I am," I replied cautiously, setting my suitcase down. Something about his smug expression didn't sit right with me. "What's with the smile?" "Oh, nothing," he said. He waved his hand as if to dismiss my question. Then with a flourish he added, "Well, I suppose you'll find out eventually. I made an important business move while you were away." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of move?" He leaned back against the arm of the sofa. His grin widened. "Your jewelry collection," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "I sold it, every piece. And before you get upset, let me just say that you'll thank me later. Your jewels financed my empire." I froze, my heart pounding as his words sank in. My jewelry collection. The pieces I'd spent years curating. Some handed down from my mother and grandmother. Others bought with my own hard-earned money. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice low and shaking. Michael laughed, clearly misreading my tone. "I said I sold them. Helen, do you know how much those diamonds were worth? Enough to start a business that will put us on the map? It's brilliant, really, you should be proud. My hands clenched into fists as anger surged through me. "You had no right, Michael. Those were my jewels. Do you realize what you've done?" He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, it's not like you were wearing half of it. It was just sitting there gathering dust. This way it's actually doing something useful. My name is Helen, and if there's one thing I've learned in my marriage to Michael, it's that his ambition always comes first. When we first met, I admired his drive. He had big dreams and I believed in him. But as the years went by, I started to see the cracks. How his charm masked a tendency to bulldoze anyone who got in his way. Still, I never thought he'd stoop so low. The jewelry collection wasn't just valuable, it was deeply personal. Each piece had a story, a connection to the life I'd built for myself. And now it was gone just like that, because Michael had decided that my possessions were his to use. But what Michael didn't know, and what made his smug grin so infuriating, was that I wasn't as careless as he thought I was. A few months ago, after hearing about a spate of local burglaries, I'd taken precautions. My most valuable pieces had discreet tracking devices embedded in their clasps. I forced myself to remain calm, to hide the storm of emotions brewing inside me. Michael thought he'd won, but the game had only just begun. That night I sat in my bedroom, staring at the open drawer where my jewelry box used to be. The empty space felt like a void, a physical reminder of what Michael had taken from me. The anger bubbling up inside me was almost too much to contain. He hadn't just sold jewelry. He'd taken pieces of my past, things I could never replace. The sapphire ring my grandmother had given me on her 80th birthday, the diamond bracelet my mother wore on her wedding day, even the gold pendant I bought for myself after landing my first. Each piece meant something, and Michael had thrown them away, as if they were nothing, then a stepping stone to his empire. My fingers hovered over the phone. I wanted to call him right then and there, yell at him, demand answers. But I knew better than to confront him when I was so angry. Instead, I opened the tracking app I'd installed months ago. The screen lit up with a map. Little red dots scattered all over the city. I gasped when I realized they were still active. My necklace was at a jewelry consignment shop in the city center. The bracelet had already been to a warehouse in the industrial area. The app even showed timestamps, tracking the journey of my belongings. As they changed hands, a grim sense of satisfaction replaced my anger. Michael might think he'd pulled a fast one on me, but I had something he couldn't prove. If the tracking data was correct, not only could I find out where my pieces were, but also prove that Michael had stolen them. I picked up my mobile and called Megan, my best friend and the one person I could always count on. "Megan," I said as soon as she answered, "you won't believe what Michael has done." "What now?" she asked. Already desperate, I explained everything. The sale, his smug attitude, the tracking devices. By the time I finished, she was as angry as I was. "Helen, you have to go to the police," she said firmly. "I will," I said, feeling a flicker of determination. First thing in the morning, I finished the call and sat back. I stared at the glowing dots on the screen. Michael had no idea what was about to happen, and for once I felt I had the upper hand. The next morning, I walked into the local police station, phone in hand and my nerves on edge. I'd never had to make a report like this before, but Megan's voice was echoing in my head. "You have to go to the police." She was right. If I let Michael get away with it, He'd only pushed the boundaries further. A friendly-looking officer greeted me at the front desk. "How can we help you today?" "I need to report a theft," I said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Was it your property?" "Yes," I replied, taking a deep breath. "My jewelry collection, it has been sold without my consent." The officer's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Let's get some details." He asked me to follow him to a desk where I explained everything. Explained everything. Michael's actions, the value of the jewelry, and the tracking devices I'd installed. When I showed him the app, his expression became serious. "This is excellent evidence," he said, taking notes. "If those tracking devices are active, we might be able to recover some of the items. Do you have a list of what was taken?" "I do," I said. I pulled out a notebook I'd filled with every piece and its approximate value. Felt strange, almost surreal as the officer read through the list. The sapphire ring, the diamond bracelet, the gold pendant. They were more than just numbers on a page. They were pieces of my life. And now they were scattered all over because of Michael's greed. The officer with Detective Carter on his name tag looked up from his notes. "We're going to start. The locations of the tracking signals. If the items are where you say they are, this could be a straightforward recovery. However, because your husband sold them without your consent, this is also fraud. Are you prepared to press charges?" I hesitated. The weight of his question weighed on me. "Yes," I said finally, "I want him held accountable." Detective Carter nodded, his expression resolute. "Good, let's get started." As I left the station, I felt a mixture of emotions. Relief that the police were taking this seriously, anger at remembering Michael, a smug grin when he told me what he'd done, and most of all, determination. For years I'd let Michael take and take, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But this time was different. This time I fought back. By the time I got home, the adrenaline from filing the report had started to wear off, leaving me with a mixture of exhaustion and anxiety. I replayed the interview with Detective Carter. In my mind, I wondered how Michael would react. Once he realized the police were involved, the thought didn't sit well. Michael had always been good at turning situations to his advantage, making himself the victim, no matter how egregious his actions. I'd seen it before. Of responsibility with a smile and a clever excuse. With a smile and a clever excuse. But this time he didn't know that I was one step ahead of him. That evening Megan came over, bottle of wine in hand. "Okay," she said as she sat down on my sofa. "Tell me everything. How did it go at the station?" I filled her in. From the evidence. About the evidence I'd shown Detective Carter. About his plan to track down the pieces. She listened intently. Her expression was a mixture of indignation and admiration. "You're handling this better than I would," she said when I had finished. "If it were me, I'd probably be in his office right now turning over desks." I laughed despite myself. "Believe me, I've thought about it. But the police have the tracking data, and I think it's my best chance of getting everything back good," Megan said, raising her glass. "To you, for not letting that smug jerk get away with it." The next day I got a call from Detective Carter. "We checked the locations of the items," he said. "Two are in a consignment shop downtown, and another in a warehouse. We've secured the cooperation of the store owners, and are moving forward with the recovery. I'll keep you updated on our progress." The relief was immediate. "Thank you," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "Does that mean I'm going to get them back?" "It's looking good," he replied. "But the investigation is ongoing. We've also flagged up your husband's financial activities. I don't want to alarm you, but there may be more going on than just the jewelry sale." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There are some unusual transactions linked to business accounts," Detective Carter explained. "We'll have to look into it further. But this could be bigger than we first thought." As I hung up, my mind raced. Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He might have been hiding a whole other side of himself. The idea that Michael's betrayal could go haunted me for the rest of the day. I paced the kitchen, replaying Detective Carter's words. This could be bigger than we first thought. What else had Michael been keeping from me? Later that night, I decided to confront him. If there was more to it than just the jewelry sale, I needed to know. As he walked through the door, his toothy grin irritated me more than usual. He threw his keys on the counter and said, "Busy day. What's for dinner?" I didn't even try to hide my anger. "Michael," I said, crossing my arms. "We need to talk now." His grin faltered, replaced by a suspicious expression. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You stole my jewelry to finance your so-called empire. And now the police are investigating you." The color drained from his face, but he tried to recover quickly. "Police? What are you talking about? I didn't steal anything, Helen. The jewelry was just sitting there gathering dust. I thought you'd be happy to see it put to good use." I shook my head in disgust at his audacity. Put to good use? Michael, you had no right to touch my things. And now the police are looking into your finances. And they think there's more than just the jewelry. His expression changed, anger flashing in his eyes. You went to the police, he hissed. You're turning this into a circus. Why couldn't you just talk to me like an adult? Because talking to you doesn't work, I shot back. You always find a way to, or talk yourself out of trouble. This time there's proof, and you can't charm your way out of it. Michael glared at me, his jaw clenching. You've made a big mistake, Ellen. If you think you can tear me down like this, you've got another thing coming. I didn't flinch. No, Michael, the only mistake I made was trusting you. But that ends now. The silence between us was heavy as he stared at me. His confidence cracked. For once, he didn't have a snappy comeback or a smug excuse. He just stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine. This was about standing up for myself, for everything. Everything I'd let Michael take from me over the years. And I wasn't going to back down. The next day, I got another call from Detective Carter. His tone was calm, but there was a weight to his words. Mrs. Parker, we've recovered 3 of the items so far, including the diamond bracelet and the sapphires. The rest are being traced to other locations. But we've had an unexpected development. What kind of development? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. We've uncovered financial transactions linked to your husband's business. That suggests fraudulent activity. Some of these seem to overlap with the sale of your jewelry, but others involve external accounts that raise red flags. We're widening the investigation. I sat down, the weight of his words pressing on my chest. Michael wasn't just selfish, he was reckless. What does that mean for me? I asked carefully. For now, you are not involved. Detective Carter reassured me. But it's important that you remain cooperative and provide any additional information we request. Your husband's actions could have serious legal consequences. I hung up and stared at the phone in disbelief. What had Michael gotten himself into? Selling my jewelry was bad enough, but fraud? I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I called Megan that night. The police think Michael is involved in something bigger, I said, pacing the living room. They're looking into his business accounts. Megan didn't sound surprised. Honestly, Helen, I'm not shocked. The way he carries himself, like the rules don't apply to him. It was only a matter of time before it caught up with him. But how could I not have seen it, I asked, my voice breaking. I married him. I trusted him, and now it all feels like a lie. Megan's tone softened. You couldn't have known Helen. He's good at hiding things, at manipulating people. But it's not your fault. You're doing the right thing by standing up for yourself. Her words gave me some comfort, but the anger and betrayal still simmered inside me. Later that night, Michael came home. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a period of frustration and barely contained rage. I know what you've done, he said. His voice was deep and venomous. The police, the bank. Do you have any idea of the damage you've done? I didn't cause this, Michael, I said. The meeting is over, you did it. And now you're finally going to face the consequences. He laughed bitterly. You think you've won? This isn't over, Helen, you're right, I said calmly. It's not over, but it's out of your hands now. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The next morning, I had another call from Detective Carter. Mrs. Parker, he began, his tone calm but serious. We've recovered several more from your jewelry collection. They have been traced to a private auction house in the city. Relief washed over me. Does this mean I'll be getting them back soon? I asked. My voice quavered with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Yes, Detective Carter confirmed. We're working through the legal process to return the recovered items to you. But there's been another development. The financial records associated with your husband's business show evidence of tax evasion and embezzlement. It's a growing case. I wasn't surprised to hear those words. By this point, I'd come to accept that Michael wasn't just careless. He was deeply unethical. I thanked Detective Carter and hung up the phone. My resolve hardened. I couldn't let Michael's actions bring me down any further. That afternoon, I took the first tangible step towards regaining my independence. I contacted a solicitor Megan had recommended, someone who specialized in both family law and financial recovery. I sat down in her office. I explained everything, from the theft of my jewelry to the unfolding police investigation. This is a mess, she said, flipping through her notes. But the good news is, you've already done a lot to protect yourself. By going to the authorities, we can apply for a formal separation and begin the process of securing your personal assets. Hearing those words was both terrifying and empowering. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, planning to disentangle my life from my husband's. But after all that Michael had done, I knew it was the only way forward. What about his business, I asked. Could this affect me financially? Potentially, she replied. That's why it's important to have clear boundaries. If his business is now under investigation, we need to make sure your finances are protected. Later that evening, as I reviewed the paperwork the lawyer had given me, Megan called to check in. How are you, she asked. I'm fine, I said, surprising even myself at the honesty of the statement. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I'm in control. It's not easy, but I know I'm doing the right thing. You are? Megan said firmly. And you're stronger than you realize. Helen, don't forget that. As I hung up, I looked at the pile of documents on the table. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time I felt ready to face it. 2 days later, I met Detective Carter at the police station to discuss the progress of the investigation. Mrs. Parker. Parker, he said, gesturing for me to sit across from him. We've traced almost all of your jewelry and confirmed that it was sold through high-value channels. The auction house and consignment stores involved have cooperated fully. That's a relief, I said. I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. And Michael, what's happening to him? Detective Carter leaned forward. He clasped his hands on the desk. The evidence against him is substantial. Between the unauthorized sale of your jewelry and the fraud to his business accounts, the DA is preparing charges. He won't get away with it. Hearing these words filled me with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Michael's actions had hurt me deeply, but knowing that he would face consequences was a step towards justice. Michael came home late that night. I sat in the living room, surrounded by legal documents and paperwork from the bank. He stopped in the doorway, his face hard and defensive. What is all this? He asked, nodding towards the papers. Divorce papers? I said evenly. I did not look up from the page I was reading. His eyes widened, and for a moment I saw real shock on his face. You're divorcing me? He asked. His voice was tinged with disbelief. Yes, Michael, I said, meeting his gaze. This is the end. I won't let you drag me down any further. He sneered, running a hand through his hair. You think you're going to come out of this unscathed? I built it all for us, Helen. Everything I've done has been for this family. I laughed bitterly. You didn't do it for us, you did it for yourself. You stole from me. You lied to me and left me to clean up your mess. This family has always been about you. He stared at me, his confidence slipping away with every word. You don't mean that, he finally said. You can't mean that. I do, I said firmly, and you'll see how serious I am. When you served. For the first time since this ordeal began, Michael was speechless. Michael was speechless. He turned and stormed from the room. He slammed the door behind him. I exhaled deeply. The sound of the door still echoed in my ears. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of getting my life back. The next morning I received a call from my solicitor. Helen, the papers have been filed. Michael will be served later today, she said. Her tone was professional but sympathetic. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Thank you, I said quietly. Helen, I know this is a difficult process, she added. But you've handled it with strength and clarity. Keep focusing on the next steps, we're in your corner. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring out the window. Out the window. For weeks my life had felt like a whirlwind of betrayal, anger and frustration. But now, for the first time, there was a sense of clarity. The pieces of my jewelry had been recovered. The police investigation was progressing, and the divorce papers marked a definitive break from the chaos that Michael had brought into my life. That afternoon, Detective Carter called with further updates. Mrs. Parker. Parker, I wanted you to know that charges will be formally filed against your husband in connection with the unauthorized sale of your property and financial fraud relating to his business accounts. He's facing multiple charges. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Does this mean I'll be to get back everything he sold? It's likely, replied Detective Carter. The evidence is strong, and the cooperating parties have agreed to return the items to you as the case progresses. But more importantly, the justice system will hold him accountable. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. As I hung up, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't consumed by the betrayal or the need to make Michael pay. I was just ready to move on. That night I met Megan for dinner. She raised her glass with a grin. To Helen. She said, the woman who didn't just survive, she thrived. I laughed and clasped my glass to hers. I don't know if I'd call it thriving yet, but I'll take it. Megan leaned in. Her expression was serious. You're stronger than you think, Helen. You took control when it mattered most. Don't forget that. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that night. For years, I'd let Michael's ambition overshadow my own sense of self-worth. But now as I looked ahead, I saw nothing but opportunity. A week later, I received a phone call from Detective Carter. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his tone lighter than before. "I wanted to let you know that we've recovered all but one of your jewels. Of your jewelry. The rest is still being traced. But the majority of your collection is ready for you." Hearing those words felt like the last piece of a heavy burden lifted from my shoulders. "Thank you, Detective," I said, relief evident in my voice. "I can't tell you how much that means to me." "We're just doing our job," he replied. "But if I may say so, you've handled the situation with remarkable strength. Not everyone takes the steps you did." After the call, I went to the station to collect the recovered items. As I held the sapphire ring that my grandmother had given me and the diamond bracelet from my mother, I felt a profound sense of closure. They weren't just pieces of jewelry. They were symbols of the life I worked so hard to preserve. Now return them to me. The day Michael was formally charged, I received a terse message from him. "You really had to drag this out, didn't you? I hope you're happy now." I didn't reply. There was no point. Michael had made his decision, and now he had to face the consequences. My energy was better spent on myself, on rebuilding, on moving forward. That evening, I went over the remaining paperwork with my solicitor. "Once the divorce is finalized, your financial separation from him will be complete." She said, "His debts won't touch you." "Thank you," I said. I felt a weight lifted. It's just what I needed. It wasn't until later that night, sitting in my quiet, new peaceful home, that I realized how much it had changed. The betrayal, the anger, the hurt, it was all still there. But it no longer consumed me. I'd learned how to set limits, how to fight for myself, and how to let go of what I couldn't control. Megan called to check in. Her usual upbeat tone lifted my spirits. "So what's next for Helen Parker?" she asked. "Honestly," I said. I smiled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Anything I want." As I hung up, I looked around my house. Not just the house, but my space reclaimed and safe. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. Michael's actions had tested me in ways I had never expected, but I'd come out stronger. And now my future was finally mine to decide.